Good morning. I'm going to take a slightly different spin than what you guys have seen this morning. I'm going to show you a real-life example of how we used real-time process data, some analytics and visualization of our data to help solve a very, very, very specific problem. So first about Baxter, we're a very large medical device manufacturer. You can see the areas that we touch, typically anything in the hospital, even in clinics, and now even in your home. We have products that meet those needs for the patients that we serve. So here's the things I'm going to talk about, the motivation for the change for us, what we did with science and technology and integrating that into our process, some of the results and some of the things that we learned along the way as we were going through this journey. So as I started the Baxter 20 some odd years ago, I was an intern for Baxter. And you work on specific projects as interns. And one of the things that was said to me years ago was, if you can solve this particular problem on our injection molding processes, you'll have something. So at that point in time, basically the challenge was set. And as luck would have it, as I went through my college career and completed that, I was able to get a job at Baxter and continue working towards that goal. And as I started, I was a quality supervisor, basic guy that's responsible for the quality of the products in one particular area, and that happened to be the injection molding department. You can see our defect trend over time. So you can see that we were doing some things to get better. We were learning a lot about our processes. We were putting a lot of things in place that helped us improve what our patients were seeing. But the real question came down to, how are you going to continue that? You've got pretty low. What's the next evolution? How are you going to be able to make this same level of progression forward as you move into the next stage of our journey relative to process control for us at Mountain Home? So we were basically tasked with, we want to make sure we're improving and not just maintaining, because when you make medical devices, maintaining is probably not going to give you a competitive advantage and probably not going to support your customers like you want to. We needed things to be more automated. We wanted things to be able to be handled, and I hit it, didn't I? Turn it sideways, maybe. And then because, at least in our industry, injection molding for years had been considered a black art. A lot of people felt like you had to have a lot of years of specific training relative to that. And even then, it was still a matter of the right guy being at the problem at the right time, twisting a knob to make the problem go away. So we wanted to put some science into that. So at the end of the day, as I joined Baxter, the challenge was set. We want you to figure out how to get to parametric release on an injection molding machine. It wasn't an easy journey, but it's something we've accomplished using some of the things you've seen here today. So around that same time frame, we figured out what we needed to do to make this happen. We needed to have real-time data available. We needed to use multivariate methods. We'd already proven to ourselves through previous work that statistical process control that's typically used wasn't going to solve our particular problem. We needed the analytics and the visualization piece to be embedded because we already had a lot of legacy hardware. Injection molding machines, they're very common off-the-shelf pieces of equipment, but the systems that they have to help you monitor and control your process aren't really that sophisticated. Data warehousing and IT solutions were available within Baxter, just not anything specific that we really needed or could use for the application that we were trying to do. We had the right tools, we just not had the right people and the right things in place to link them together. So for a medical device, at least in my world, most of the things that we talk about are very, very low cost. So you go into the pharma side of the business, batches are worth millions of dollars. You come into my world, I make millions of parts a day that cost less than a penny a piece. So when you're talking very low margin, you have to be very good and very quick at what you do to capture your problems, because even though they're small and they're relatively inexpensive, when they make it to that next manufacturing step at another plant around the world, that problem gets exponentially more costly. So you can see a typical cycle time for me is 18 to 45 seconds, and I can produce little molded components anywhere between 2 to 64 at a time in that 8 to 45 second window. So that's why it's really important to have real-time data and the speed. We've also been able to prove over the years that a typical sampling plan that most medical device companies would use is not very effective in detecting defects at that production rate. Things will look fine and your customer will call you and say, hey, we just found something, let's go have a recall. That's not something you like to do. Like you mentioned earlier, recalls want to be avoided at all costs. The other thing about an injection molding process is defect rates are usually very, very, very low. Your process is always pretty stable, usually pretty capable. And the point in your process that causes that particular defect may only last 2 or 3 cycles out of however many 100,000 cycles you may run in a day. So to find that, you almost have to have real-time data. So this is an example of a typical injection molding process broken down into the phases. So we've clamped up, now we're injecting plastic. This is the same process to use the pins on your desk, your cell phone covers, same kind of things. Then we cool the plastic, the mold opens and drops the part. So from a processing perspective, you break it down into those particular phases or steps, and then you start to look at the data for those particular steps. And we knew we had to have a certain fundamental base in place to make this thing happen in order to get to real-time release. So these are the things that we said over the course of years that we wanted to do to make sure that when we got there, that we had everything in place to make sure that we could maintain this. So we had to do some training relative to scientific or decoupled process validation relative to injection molding to get our operators up to speed. We had to control some things. We had to make sure we don't ever block cavities. If you've ever talked to anybody in the injection molding world, that's something that's pretty regularly done. It's not done within Baxter. We try not to do that. We wanted to make sure we had the right sensors in place. We wanted to make sure we had secondary mechanisms in place in case something did go wrong that we could detect it. We wanted to make sure we had visual tools in place to make sure that we could monitor our process. And then we wanted to really train all of our operators. And in a large manufacturing facility like us, we're a 24/7 operation, and most of your operators, they're not degreed. Typically, they have a high school education, so you have to have things at a level that they appreciate and give them the value and the tool that they need to be able to manage the process that we honestly expect them to run every day. So at the end of the day, what I'm trying to do is get a multivariate fingerprint of my injection molding process. So I'm using some real-time data, some embedded analytics, and some visualization to help achieve that for our company. It basically starts out very simple. Old school, you tie into some actual analog and digital sensors. From there, you go over into a unit and you make some calculated variables based upon those. Those are the listing that we typically use there. So once you have that data available, now you can really start to understand your process first of all, because when you typically get to this step, you'll start to find things wrong with your machine that you may have not known existed. You may find shorts in wiring, you may find the wrong sensor, you may find all kinds of things that you'll correct as you go through this phase. Once you have that done, then what we do is we like to go in and basically when we're building our multivariate model, we want to teach it a couple of sets of data. One, we want to say, okay, here's all the variation you would expect to see from your typical raw material and your process, and we want to capture that. But then we also know, like most people who work in a manufacturing facility, if you run 24/7, odds are you're going to have one shift of operators that like to turn the knob here, and even though the machine's running perfectly fine, the next shift of operators come in and they want to turn the knob here. So up front, we build that variation into our model as well to make sure we accommodate for that. So it's easier to just accommodate it than it is to argue with them to tell them not to twist the knob or physically go cut the wire so the knob doesn't do anything. And when we do that, and we look at it multivariantly with the variables that we look at, you can see I get a great R squared, so 97%. So I can pretty well explain what's happening in that molding process very, very well. And this just gives you a visualization of what my designed data looks like after it's being analyzed. So you've got a couple of nice plots to show you what it looks like. You've got a response surface to kind of show you the interactions between the variables, and then the overall explainability of what you're modeling. And we're doing this, we partnered with MKS, and we've kind of, over the years, worked together to make this piece of hardware called a SenseLink QM. Basically, it's a standalone system. It's very cool. Basically, you tap into your raw data from there. It's Ethernet connected, so you can now get the data out. You talked earlier about the ability to do remote sensing and remote support. That is there as well. We can export all of our data. Because I'm in an FDA-regulated environment, I have to store my decisions about accept or reject. So the FDA may say, how do you know that these particular products made on this day were acceptable? I have to have that data available and in a Part 11 compliant database to pull out to say, on this day, here's the decisions that were made and here's why. So that's also part of this little system. We use for molding machines, it's very simple in terms of the control. We're not actually adjusting our process. We found it to be more efficient for us to actually do an accept reject signal. So if the calculations come back and says this particular cycle looks different, rather than trying to compensate for that, we simply throw those components away. Then we have a control structure relative to if you have X number of rejects in a row, then we're going to go get somebody involved. But typically for the process upsets that we're talking about, it's more cost effective and economical for me just to trash it automatically and move on. And then we also use this for the visualization tool for the operators, like I said it earlier. So it had to be simple, like I said, because you're a 24/7 operation. What you're teaching your operators to use has to be very, very, very simple in a plant environment. So this is the visualization that they're taught how to use. Basically, anything in green or yellow, that product is acceptable, and we're going to release it to the next manufacturing step. Anything that's in red, that product is going to be automatically discarded or thrown away. Each one of those points on there is basically a multivariate summation of all the variables that we're monitoring. And it's the overall fit for that particular cycle. If my operator wants to know more about that, they can move their mouse over one of those points, and then you get this little yellow box that pops up. And it'll tell them the time and date stamp of that cycle. And then it shows them in order of importance the variables that were impacted for that particular decision. So now when you have operators that are on the floor and you get a specific defect, typically they might have a list of reasons, 40 things long, that said, these 40 things can cause this defect, and they're going to have to work through that combination to resolve the issue. Now they have real-time data in their hand to say, oh, this particular parameter was high, this particular parameter was low. They can use that with their knowledge and training to say, now I can shorten that list of 40 down to 3. My troubleshooting time is much faster, and we're much more productive. So some of the things that we've done as a company to try to standardize this across the board for us. So we've standardized on how we're going to integrate to our machines. This is one application that Baxter lets me talk about. It's injection molding. There are a lot of other applications that Baxter does not let me talk about, but we've standardized to using the SenseLink. We've got a standard methodology around data collection. Basically, it's a proceduralized process already within Baxter of here's what you do to go through this process. Here's the methodology that you go through for your model development. And then here's the methodology to go in and validate that, so that we've got a cookie cutter process now that we can walk up to any injection molding machine around the world and say, follow these X number of steps, and at the end of the day, you'll have a defendable, validated process that shows that you're in parametric release for that particular component. So what kind of benefit did we see from this? So initially when we put these things in, we saved about 2,000 year hours in labor just simply by going to parametric release. I have enough confidence in my overall process capability that I don't any longer have the need to go measure components, because I'm basically predicting my component quality off of my parameters as opposed to spending time and effort to physically go measure a dimension. Production volumes went up considerably, and the numbers that we're at now currently today are exponentially higher than that. And during this time frame, we went up 26% and didn't have to add any headcount relative to the typical quality organization where you would pay someone to go measure components. So that was a big deal for us. Probably the biggest thing for us was non-conformances. We saw a greater than 90% reduction in the number of non-conformances that we were seeing from our injection molding process. So to me, that was solidifying our assumption from day one that having real-time data and having that data available 100% of the time had a real fundamental business impact. Because if you think about the cost of a 90% reduction in a 24/7 plant like mine with the volume of machines like I have, that's a just very, very significant number. It also helped with faster machine startups, because now you've got a defined process window that when your operator starts that machine up, they know where they need to be in terms of setup and hitting the sweet spot, as opposed to rounding the edges like you stated earlier, in terms of sometimes when that machine first starts up, it doesn't like to be where it wants to be. So the other thing that's been really good for us in terms of using real-time data, having the visualization and the analytics piece available to our operators, is just the overall process knowledge. And that to us is really important as well. So these are examples of some of the things that we've been able to detect with these real-time systems. So we've been able to detect things that our suppliers may have changed on us and not told us. That's not supposed to happen in a medical device industry, but it does from time to time. And having a system like this in place allows you to detect that faster and be able to go back and start asking the difficult questions for your supplier. It's helped us detect intermittent hardware failures. So you can see that the process may be running fine and then the wheels fall off, and then it runs fine again and the wheels fall off. This allowed us to actually go troubleshoot a problem that most of our internal experts didn't think we would ever be able to detect with typical means that we'd used over the years past. And then also, same kind of thing in terms of just the overall process itself. Sometimes your process does have changes or something that does drift in it. And you can see, if you look at the plot, you can see there's the impact of my 3 shifts. So my operators like to come in and twist my knobs, right? I've got 3 clusters. But then you can also start to see something happening here, and it gets worse over time. That's where the machine actually slipped back and was starting to leak plastic material out the back. And the system is sensitive enough to detect that, throw the products away, and get the operator's attention to go fix it. So at the end of the day, for our journey, what we've been able to do is make sure that the real-time data that we have has helped increase our understanding and our knowledge of our process. The information age relative to how things are relatively low cost nowadays for data access and storage has really made a transformation for us. The embedded analytics and visualization piece has helped us make this scalable so that we can easily have one set of training materials that we can throw around the world to any plant and say, here, this is what you need to do. We've already proven it out, so don't go waste your time testing or trying to retrain, follow this. And then the dashboards that we have up for the operators, give them really good actionable insights in terms of what they need to do to go adjust their process to make sure that we're producing a high quality product. Because for us at the end of the day, we have to make a difference for our patients, and if we're not making high quality products, we won't.